Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5 Minute Histories videos. And today I'm downtown outside of Port Discovery, but we're not going to talk about the great children's museum behind me. We're going to talk about what was going on here 100 years ago, which was Baltimore's fish market, and in particular the most famous spice blend to come out of the fish market, which of course is Old Bay. I am thrilled to be joined today by Francesca Cohen, who is a senior at UMBC. She spent the summer with us researching and writing about Baltimore's history, including Old Bay. Before I turn it over to Francesca, though, let me say one quick public service announcement and one quick bit of history. The public service announcement is that in October, we are hosting a preservation celebration. Stay tuned for details. We hope you can come. And as part of that, we're going to be giving away 2 micro grants, 2 of $500, 2 of $1,000, to people who are doing great things in our historic communities. And if you are one of those people, or you know of one of those people, we would love to hear from you and give you a chance at getting a little bit of support for your work. We'll put a link to the application. It's just one paragraph, super simple, and you can always give us a call and we'll help you out. All right, let's turn to the history part here. When Gustav Brunn came to Baltimore in the 1930s, eventually inventing Old Bay, he of course was not the first person to eat crabs or to season crabs, and we know that in part because of the Smithsonian Institute. About 10 years ago, a couple researchers did an exhaustive study of the history of crab eating on the shores of the Chesapeake, and they did it through archaeology work. It's kind of curious that most of the archaeology digs had not turned up evidence of people eating crabs, and in fact some researchers thought that Native Americans really didn't eat crabs at all, but they were wrong. The Smithsonian folks knew that crab shells deteriorated quickly, but if you're a Smithsonian researcher, and I suspect a crab aficionado, you know what to look for in these archaeology digs, and it's not big pieces of shell, it's the tiny little tips of the claws that are really hard and disintegrate really slowly. So these folks sifted through the boxes from 100 other digs and found lots of crab shells. They found crab claws in an early 1600s Native American dig site. They found crab claws at George Washington's Mount Vernon. They found crab claws at a cabin owned by an African American family in the late 1800s. It seems that if you had access, you were eating crabs and you ate a lot of them. So what about the seasonings? The archaeology digs did not discover or unearth any of the seasonings, but we know that people were seasoning crabs very early on. For example, in 1685, there's a cookbook, The Accomplished Cook, that gives a recipe for steaming crabs, taking the meat out, and then seasoning them with almond paste, nutmeg, and egg yolks, and then frying them. Basically a crab cake. Another early cookbook from 1747, The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy by Hannah Glass. She mixes her crabs with anchovy paste, white wine, and nutmeg. Nutmeg seems to be a common ingredient. So by the time Gustav Brunn arrives in the 1930s here next to the fish market, he finds a bunch of crab vendors selling crabs and mixing their own spices that had been handed down for generations. But he saw an opportunity. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Francesca.
Thank you so much, Johns, for introducing me and giving us a little bit of an introduction to the history of Old Bay and Gustav Brunn. I just kind of want to continue the story of Gustav Brunn and give you guys more information about who he is. It's actually a very interesting story. Brunn arrived from Nazi Germany after spending 16 days in a concentration camp. His family was actually able to bail him out, and after doing so, they immediately got on a boat and came to the United States. Unfortunately, since they were fleeing Germany, they weren't able to take a lot of things with them. But one thing Brunn did take with him was his industrial-sized spice grinder. And it's actually very, very large. So it was a commitment for him to bring it over here. And when he came over, he originally started to work for McCormick, because he was already in the spice trade. He was familiar with spices. But McCormick found out that he was Jewish, and unfortunately, after several days, he was terminated. And he didn't really know what to do with himself, so he kind of floated around to several jobs. And then somebody said, well, you have this spice grinder, you have the industrial equipment, why don't you start a spice company like you had in Germany? So right across from the fish market at 26 Market Place, Brunn opened up the Baltimore Spice Company, which would eventually produce Old Bay. But when he started the Baltimore Spice Company, he didn't sell Old Bay. He sold individual spices that he ground up. And he saw all these fishmongers come in and buy sets of spices, similar sets of spices. And he wondered to himself, why are they doing that? And he found out it was for the crabbers. They would put the seasoning on the crabs and then sell the crabs. And he thought to himself, if they're doing it and I'm a spice maker, why can't I do it? So he studied what they were doing, and then he created Old Bay out of 18 different spice mixtures. And the reason he put so many different ingredients in is to make it unique among an oversaturated crab spice market. Once he did that, he tried to start to sell it, but it wasn't really successful. People in Baltimore, every single person had their special crab recipe and they weren't going to change it. So he decided, you know what? Let me do some marketing. So he went out to the different vendors and he gave them free samples. And when they tried it, they realized how great it was, and it started to spread all over Baltimore. So he decided he needed to give the spice a name, and his friend suggested Old Bay after the Old Bay shipping line. So that was how Old Bay was born in Baltimore, from a Jewish immigrant fleeing Nazi Germany.